Right. So hi, we're here to have a bit of a roundtable discussion about tabletop game jams. Specifically, a number of years ago, there was one called Threeforged. We didn't really call them game jams at the time, but basically it's the same thing. It was a, designed tabletop RPG under some constraints in a particular time period, and that was Threeforged. And then, you know, a few years later, there have been another few jams that were inspired by that. So one was Threeforged 2019, which is a very direct inspiration, and then also the Refraction Jam, which had some inspiration from Threeforged in it. And I thought it would be interesting to gather the organizers of these three jams together, and we could have sort of a conversation about them. So I've got a few questions, to seed things with if we need them. But my thought is we can just have a relatively open conversation if we can, and just try to see where it goes organically. So I'm Dan Maruschak. I participated in all of the jams, and I decided to try to put this conversation together. So let's kind of go around, I guess, in the order of when the jams happened. And you guys could introduce yourselves and give kind of an overview of what it was and what it was about, and then we can go from there.
Okay, so Threeforged was first. It was in 2015, in August and September, I think, and it was an outgrowth actually of a conversation I think you and I had, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Where you were talking about, wanting designers to be able to form connections better, I think. Mm-hmm. And I suggested, well, why not do a jam that was structured around that? Well, I didn't call it a jam, but a design challenge. And I think you were skeptical that it would work to form connections and didn't really want to pursue it yourself. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I think this could be, I think this could be good. So what it was 3 rounds of game designing, and it was anonymous. So if you wanted to participate, you emailed me and I gave you a number, that would be your game number, and you submitted an initial game idea that had a controlled word count to it, and the file name was that number. And you had a couple of weeks to do it, and then I randomized everybody and sent them back out and to participants, and they got to work on your idea further with an increased word count target. And then when those got returned, I randomized them and sent them out again, and to be turned into final games and submitted. And I think I was just looking before our conversation now. I think we got something like 128 games submitted in that first round. A bunch of people fell off the cart, over the course of 3 rounds and, multiple weeks of work. And I think there were something like 103 final games submitted. And then there was a judging phase. There was a voting phase where I said, if you tell me that you've read several of the games, then you can vote. Anybody could vote whether they participated or not. And it was a ranked voting, and a lot of really great things came out of that. I think people felt like, I don't know, I think, a lot of people followed it, it felt like an event. Mm-hmm. And people wrote reviews. Someone named Alan DeSmet created a spreadsheet that collected reviews from wherever people were posting them on their blogs or on Google Plus at the time, collected links to them, and had a tracking system in it that allowed people to see which games had not been reviewed, so that I think everybody felt like they were, creating this body of knowledge that would help people with the voting phase. And so then the voting happened, and we narrowed it down to something like 5 finalists, I think, maybe a few more than that. And I had asked a panel of judges to read the finalists from the public voting and pick a winner. And I was very intentional about the panel that I asked. I wanted, international. I wanted, gender diversity and ethnic diversity on my, on the panel, and they picked the winner, and I think the winner was a game by Grant Howitt. But the whole thing was super. I mean, it was bigger than I expected it to be in a lot of ways. It was the eventness of it, when people were writing reviews, and was more than I expected. I think it did. I think you were right in being skeptical, because I don't think that it. I don't think it succeeded in. I mean, I had goals for it, and I liked the idea that if people were participating anonymously and and created something together like that, that they thought that they felt good about at the end, that that it would cause people to form connections and insights into each other as designers. And I don't think it really did that. My other goals were, I think, like women designers in particular, I think feel often like it's a dude culture, and they can't, get, and that it's harder for them to be appreciated for the quality of their work, and that there's a lot of networking in the dude culture that they're on the outside of. And I was hopeful that my throat, hold on, just sorry about that. And so I was hopeful that if people were being evaluated on, if it was anonymous, that people were being evaluated on the quality of their work and on their abilities as a designer. I thought that would help people get some recognition in circumstances where it probably felt hard to get recognition. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure I succeeded at that either. But the whole thing was very fun. People still talk about it today. If you look at like actual documents produced, it was probably the biggest game challenge of the year, I think, in terms of actual, because there were 3 stages worth of documents produced. I think it was more than what Game Chef, from that year, more than the 200-word RPG challenge that year. So I think it was a big thing. People still talk about it. It was super fun. Didn't do some of the things that I wanted it to, but it was super fun.
All right. So Ben, I think yours was next, chronologically. So.
Right, chronologically, and clearly directly inspired, obviously, by the name just alone. Threeforged 2019 grew out of a conversation that I was having with, I was going to call it a small community, but really it was essentially two people kind of coming out of the big explosion of game jams that I saw happening on Itch, that I sort of joined the game design community just a little bit too late to really take part of. I joined up with a weekly one-page game a month sort of challenge community called OmGam. And we were hanging out and chatting about designing games and challenges, and what were some thinking about ways to sort of expand that mindset of doing quick games, doing simple games, trying to make games to bring lots of people on board. And we're looking at challenges that we thought had done some interesting stuff and were successful in that, which was how I got introduced to Paul's original Threeforged Jam. And after a lot of conversation of us talking about who wants to run it, who wants to be part of it, I volunteered to run the challenge on Itch. And once again, trying to definitely the standout had been the emotional mecha jam that I think had concluded earlier that year, unless I'm off by my time a little bit. I don't know that I have anywhere near the clarity of memory that Paul has in remembering exactly how things sort of came together. I do remember that it wound up being kind of a protracted event, because many people, we did not attract a nearly the same size audience, and we had a lot of people who asked for additional time to work on their games. So it wound up, I think we started in, let me see if I can find out exactly when we started.
Yeah, so the page itself said it was from November 1st to December 20th.
And I think we just finished, me and some panelists that I recruited just finished reading through all of them and writing our responses at the turn of the new year. So it wound up being kind of a 2-month-long jam. I think we had similar goals in terms of trying to expand a network of designers, trying to get people in communication with each other, trying to reach out to what I kind of think as sort of a new audience and new culture of game design on Itch. I don't know that new is doing a lot of philosophical work. New at the very least being it's a new website and new people are on it. And I think that there were some ways in which it was really successful. There are definitely some quirks about hosting it through a website, which is primarily a storefront, that I don't love. I did not like quite so much how that worked out, and I kind of long for the days when it was easier to send everybody to a blog or a link of blogs, and everybody is sort of clicking on the same shared network. Yeah, I think that's what I'd say about 2019. Quick data facts. We got, I think we wound up with 17 submissions. I think one of those might have been after the jam had officially ended. I recruited 2 other people through, I think, a combination of Twitter and the RPG Design Talk Discord server. And we did not coordinate super much. We again left sort of anonymous comments on each of the games. And again, yeah, everybody could rate games that they had said that they had read. We assigned game designers a couple of games to be sure that every game did get read, but said as long as you've read them, you can judge any of them that you wanted to. And we did wind up with a ranking. That was, I think, another part that I didn't totally love was feeling beholden to Itch's ranking system. But I did like that I think some really cool comments came out of it, and definitely seeing the archive of design documents, as Paul was saying, is really, really cool to me.
Okay. So, Josh, I think yours is the most recent.
Yeah. I mean, you guys seem to have thought through what you were doing a lot more than I did, I have to say. I think when I first heard about the existence of a thing called a game jam, I wanted it to be something like Threeforged. I don't think I'd come across Threeforged at that point, but I just thought, oh, it's a jam, right? So a jam is where you are designing together. And then when I found out the reality is actually just a bunch of people kind of all designing roughly the same concept or constraints, but not together, that was kind of a little bit disappointing, to be perfectly honest. So Threeforged was incredibly exciting to me. I took part in both Threeforgeds and also Duet Jam, which was run by Natalie Libra. I don't know exactly when, but which was a bit more kind of you were assigned a pair and worked together to design a game together. And the reason why, by the way, Paul, it was my game seed that won Threeforged 1, so it was Groundhowitt that wrote it, but it was my mechanic, and he did not change that mechanic, so it was a good mechanic, and I feel happy about that. Anyway, enough boasting. All three were really, really engaging to me for the reason that you get to connect with another designer, to take someone else's ideas and extend them and add your own twist on them and cross-pollinate. That is the word that I use when I talk about these things, is cross-pollination. And I guess having been in 3 of those and built literally 0 network out of it, I was under no illusions that I would be successfully setting up a grand designer network, even though that is something I would very much love to do. But the idea of people's ideas cross-pollinating with or without a network is very attractive to me, and I think that's kind of what I was hoping to get out of it, if there was something other than having a fun game design challenge that I was trying to do. And so I shook up quite a few of the rules that Threeforged had. I sort of intentionally modeled the kind of had the same kind of model in mind, but I wanted to change it in a few ways. Partly because I was worried about drop-off rate, and it just seemed to me that there was a lot of potential for either getting a game assigned to you that didn't excite you and that you just didn't want to take forward, or just life happening. And it's like there's 3 different points at which somebody might fall over for whatever reason and not be able to complete their involvement. So I wanted to try and address that, and I wanted to maximize cross-pollination. So with those goals in mind, I made some changes. I said we're not going to assign any games. You can choose any game you want from the list of round 1 submissions. I'm going to have only 2 stages, so that there's less opportunity for people to drop out, and I'm going to let people react to more than 1 game if they want to, so that hopefully that's going to maximize the cross-pollination. And obviously conversely, that meant that whereas in the 2 Threeforged competitions there was not quite a guarantee, but quite a high percentage chance that if you entered in round 1 your game was going to get developed, and I had to be honest with people that your game might not get developed at all. So I was a bit worried that might mean that people just didn't enter in the first place. So I was hoping that people would overcome that and enter, and then that there would be a greater translation to the second round as a result of the various changes I'd made. That is almost the exact opposite of what happened. There were, I've written this down somewhere, 38 entries to stage 1, which was good. I was hoping for a good high number. There's nothing like Threeforged 1, but it was good for me. I was really satisfied with that. And then stage 2, there were only 11 entries, despite giving people a little bit of extra time. And that was those 11 games were by 8 people, by the way, so it's an even higher drop-off rate than it sounds like. So I was kind of disappointed by that. I'm not sure what the reason was for, given that I had designed it to try and maximize throughput. I wondered whether perhaps the lack of a concrete commitment, it's like Threeforged basically said, if you're going to enter, you should try to build on someone else's game, and the fact of having kind of made that commitment at the start may have had an impact, or it might just be that it was in the middle of a pandemic, etc., etc. There might be other reasons, I don't know. But I was really happy with despite the relatively low number of round 2 entries. I was very happy with what happened with them. There was a lot of cross-pollination. There were a lot of people reacting to multiple games and kind of plucking various threads of ideas and weaving them together, alongside a few which were just built on one game, and even one person who just built on their own game, slightly oddly, I thought. Yeah, and I didn't do any judging. I did think about that, whether it would be good to do judging, and decided I think possibly like you, Ben, I was a bit kind of wary of the idea of scoring and what have you. So I'm quite interested by what Paul was saying about how the scoring system engaged people with the games. So that may have been an error on my part, but yeah, I don't think it's generated the level of buzz that previous contests generated, albeit a small group of very enthusiastic participants. Oh, and I'm Josh Fox, by the way. I didn't introduce myself. Hello.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
So
oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to comment on something that Josh said about worrying about people dropping off. I definitely had people drop off at each of the 2 stages, but there was so much going on, with people following the competition, and I think everybody realized how disappointing that would be to someone, who was, somebody wasn't going to complete their game from stage 1, but they're busy completing somebody else's game, for stage 2. That what I did was I recruited people to, if somebody said I'm not going to get something done, I recruited people to, can you finish another game? Are you interested in doing another one? And there were a handful of people that ended up doing multiple round 2s or round 3s just because they said, I've got time, I'll work on somebody else's game. Which doesn't mean every game got completed all the way through until the end, but I felt good about being able to recruit people, and I felt good that people were willing to do it. That felt like it felt like there was a lot of cultural stuff happening that was really good, even though it wasn't necessarily the cultural stuff I expected. To have people recognize and want to finish somebody's game for them, and then the reviewing thing as well. When people wrote over 500 reviews of the games, so that I did feel good about that.
Yeah, I mean that review stage was, I think, probably kind of unexpected by everybody, and maybe it was kind of a lightning in a bottle sort of thing given the time, but it was really interesting because there was that period where everybody was done designing, but we were all still anonymous from each other, and we didn't know who had written what game, but we were all sort of invested in what was going on, and it's kind of like, well, here's something we can do to still be participating. We can read these other games and talk about them, and I think that sort of provided a lot of seed of the energy of what was going on there.
It's super interesting because I know Game Chef struggles with that every year. Game Chef, divides the games up, assigns you to read and comment, on some of them, and people just don't do it. You know, it takes them a long time. They don't end up reading the ones they're supposed to, and and it's interesting that something like Threeforged created this sort of groundswell of eager reviewing, and in another context, Game Chef struggles with it all the time, and I don't know why.
I mean, I can support what Dan is saying. That I can remember how frustrating it was that you didn't know who you were designing with, and you weren't allowed to talk about it, because if you did talk about it, you would be breaking the anonymity. So you're kind of doing this really cool thing, and you're not allowed to talk about it. It's like, so I wonder, you might be right, Dan, that there's a certain amount of kind of pent up energy that needed releasing somewhere, and so it gets released into writing reviews. I don't know. Also, was it in the golden days of G+? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, it definitely was in the G+ era.
We all hark back to G+, which is probably rose-tinted spectacles, but I do think there was a sense of community at that time that has probably now coalesced around itch, but it's just not. I don't know. I mean, I'm not as in touch with the community on itch, so I don't know to what extent that feeling of wanting to kind of support each other is there or not.
Yeah, no, I struggle with that as well. I don't feel super connected.
Yeah, I've noticed. I've been really interested in trying to get itch to be more of a communal space, but it just does not seem like there's quite the same energy there that I heard about there was on G+. And I see some people tweeting constantly about, like, come check out my forums, come hang out on the itch forums. It's just fighting an uphill battle, I think.
Yeah, I think there's been a kind of a fragmentation, and I get the sense a lot of the talk on itch is now happening in like private discords and things where there might be a really, really strongly connected group of people, but not everyone can see that in the way that, I mean, I guess G+ had a bit of that too, different people kind of closing off their circles and so on, but it felt a bit more open to me, probably as a privileged designer.
My sense of Google Plus is that it wasn't necessarily the technology, but I think a lot of the norms of interactions had sort of carried over a lot from people who were used to forums. So I think there was sort of a sense of a little bit more openness there, of just like the way people were interacting more. And I think my impression was it was sort of morphing into more of a standard social media thing by the time it ended. And I think social media is not necessarily what binds people together as communities, but yeah, and I think we're definitely a lot more fragmented now. Yeah, so I mean, I think it is interesting that we all sort of talked about that community element, and it's like it seems like everybody wants this connection, but we can't figure out how to make it happen. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of why Paul mentioned that I was sort of skeptical at the beginning. It's it's like when he described it, I thought, yeah, that would be a cool thing, but I don't think it would result in community. And I turned out to be sort of right in that prediction, in both predictions, right? It did turn out to be a lot of fun, and I found it super engaging as a designer. But yeah, it's like, and even though there was that burst of community while it happened, it's also kind of like, well, it's over now. And it's kind of like there wasn't a lot of, a huge amount of carryover after it, which I found a little bit surprising. But I always feel that way, so.
I wonder if people have been able to talk about it. The anonymity thing had its benefits, but it limited the ability of people to kind of come together around, excitement about the jam. I wonder if that would have made a difference. Speculating.
You were gonna say something, Paul?
Oh, just, thinking about community and, when you're creating something like this, you're trying to anticipate human behaviors and how people are going to react to stuff, and how, Josh just said, what if there was no anonymity? But, at that point, I'd be thinking, well, then if you've got this landscape of games where people can, pick whatever they want to, work on. If you've got a game by Vincent Baker, how many people are going to want to pick Vincent's game as a basis for, their round 2 or their, so you're constantly sort of flipping these switches to, to see what's going to create the most energy, what's going to have the outcome, that you want. I mean, maybe this is a question. If you were going to do it again, what would you change about what you did? Would you do it on a different platform? What would you change? I can answer that about Threeforged because I've thought about it a lot. I think I would control the participation differently. I would want, because there were, just guessing based on people's names. I mean, I didn't ask for pronouns or anything like that when I did it back in 2015. But out of the 128, initial game submissions, there might have been a dozen that were by women. And I think I'd want to change that. I'd want it to be a much higher percentage. So I think I would say, if you're not straight, you're not white, or you're not not male, then you're in. And then I will allow an additional, X number of people beyond that. And just try to sort of change the participation, the population of people participating, just by being overt about it. What would you do differently about yours?
I think I would have really liked to have. I think I would have liked to have used a website in addition to itch to organize it. I do think that there's incredible game design happening on itch, and there's a lot of really awesome designers that I see popping up there. And one thing that I did notice is that I did not run the numbers, but I do know for certain that we've got a bunch of designers on itch who are non-binary or trans or are otherwise deviating from the straight male mold. And I think that it's cool to be on itch and be a part of like reaching out to the community that way. I do feel like it's got a sort of a different demographic thrust than what I would normally think of as the game design community. So it's nice to be on itch, but I don't know that I love all of their tools. We've definitely been one of the frustrating things was, okay, great, we've wound up with all these awesome games written by 3 people. Who gets to have the game on their store? Who gets to sell the game? Everybody does. Everybody has to make their own. Yeah, so just all sorts of little complications like that, especially around the reviewing too. I think it would have been neat to have. I feel like hosting it on itch was really cool, and I liked that decision a lot. But the various itch jam tools, I don't think were well designed for this. Did not match the goals that I had for the jam.
So I think part of me thinks that these sorts of events want to be an in-person event rather than an online event, because I think you could generate some real energy. There's a sense of energy dissipates over a number of weeks. People have got busy lives, and I think I could imagine a version of Threeforged where you just kind of you got a bunch of game designers together, and over the course of a weekend, they hammered out these games. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's what I would do differently. It's a thing that I want to try for sure. Is I feel like that could crack some of the issues that you've described about representation and about yeah, just kind of generating community and energy, obviously on a much more limited scale, one would think. But let's just forget about that, because that's kind of a little pipe dream of mine to one day do something like that. And I think an online thing is maybe a bit more realistic. I guess I would probably just want to plug into some of the communities that I don't have the reach to. You know, I'm aware of my limited reach, and I just went ahead and did this thing anyway. I was just like, oh, you know, let's just get on and do it. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about how I could maximize the number of people involved. But I think if I wanted to expand it, and you know, I think that's the main thing I would want, is to get more people involved, to get that critical mass. I would want to work with somebody from that itch community that Ben was just describing. I think you know, that would have been a really good thing to tap into, and just generally to try and maybe get some either co-organizers or champions on board who could try and drum up enthusiasm, because I think really probably involvement was mostly limited to people who were connected to one of my networks. And I would like to try and see more throughput, and I don't really know what the answer to that is. Threeforged 1, I think, had a higher throughput, so maybe the answer is just to kind of go back to that formula. It seemed to work, but I really do like that kind of cross-pollination thing too. So I don't know if there's some sort of clever way that you can get people to commit to doing a round 2 game while still giving people some freedom of choice. Don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, like, see Paul reaching to unmute himself, I think, but like, I think the fact that Paul did have a pretty decent reputation, you know, coming out of the Forge and story games and that kind of thing, I think certainly helped make Threeforged happen. I think it certainly, almost certainly wouldn't have been as successful as if I had been trying to run it, because I think I just didn't have the reach. So I think that was part of it, is that, you know, he sort of lends some credibility of, hey, here's a cool thing that you can be a part of.
Oh, I've done a lot of things that did not have any traction at all. About a year ago, I tried to do a jam on itch. It was called Stories of Storyplay Jam, and you know, I'd been looking at itch, and there were all these people were writing these duet games. You know, they were writing these 2-player games. Nobody plays those at conventions. They don't play them, you know, with the exception maybe of Murderous Ghosts. No, you know, nobody goes to Games on Demand and plays a duet game, and yet there are hundreds of them on itch, and it felt to me like people had just sort of mentally not figured out how to make duet games a part of their gaming life, you know, about how they saw themselves as a gamer. And so Stories of Storyplay was my effort to say, hey, pick a game you don't think that you would play and write the fiction of actually playing it. And you know, my goal for that was, if enough people were writing about themselves as if they were playing these games, people would start thinking of themselves as people who play these games, and it would, it would have an impact. But in fact, I only got 3 submissions for that jam, and one of them was mine. So so I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe they hated the idea. I think name recognition helps, I suppose, but it's not the. It may not even be the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to reverse engineer like what caused the success, right? If something's a hit and you're like, well, it was something caused it, but we don't know what.
Yeah. I mean, Josh has pretty good name recognition. So I don't know. Coming out of the Forge sort of started doing its own game challenge thing. It was a cultural element of the Forge for designers to issue game design challenges. Kevin Allen Jr. issued one called Reverse Engineering Challenge at one point. That was, it was 2 rounds. People created character sheets in the abstract, and then those got randomized, and people had to create games based on the character sheets. That particular jam certainly had a mental, influence on my construction of Threeforged, with the multiple stages and the randomization of the input. Mm-hmm. Jared Sorensen issued a design challenge at one point. It was called Indie Game Company Game Design Challenge or something, and you were supposed to form a company of one person who was a designer and one who was a writer, one who was an artist, and produce something together and actually sell it for a month. And the winner is who got the most sales. And he threw a wrinkle in at one point. The wrinkle was anybody. Once you got past the first month and you had designed your thing and you were ready to start selling it, he said indie game companies can come in too. It can be a one-person auteur. They can write a game, but they have less time to sell it. They've got to get it done and try and get it sold and try and win based on that. And Game Chef was originally inspired by the 24-hour comic challenge, and the idea that in comics people would issue challenges to each other. So with Threeforged, I was just sort of following on that particular tradition, which was sort of an independent thing. Itch has its own game design, its own game jam tradition that's an outgrowth of indie video games, which is why some of the ranking tools probably feel, misapplied to a tabletop RPG. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it was just the time was right. Everybody understood the game challenge tradition. I mean, I called it a challenge. I didn't call it a jam because it was before anybody in tabletop was really using itch for anything.
I mean, looking back, it feels like that may have coincided with the peak of RPG community connectedness. I think before, I don't know what there was before G+.
It was discussion forums. It was the Story Games discussion forum.
Yeah, I mean, I think Plus was bigger than that, and I think there's more game design going on now than there was then, and there's probably more role playing going on now than there was then, but it's not connected. Is balkanized the right word? It's all over the place in the little patches and groups. And there's probably more game jams going on. I mean, if you go and look at the itch game jams feed, you can just literally walk in on a given day and have a look at the list, and you will find a dozen or more, maybe 2 dozen tabletop either tabletop or multiple format game jams that you can enter. They're all mostly tiny, like they will have like less than a dozen entrants, so that's a bit different. I don't think we had competitions going around. Maybe they were there and I didn't know about them, but now it's just like, yeah, well, you want to have a jam, go do it. I mean, it's really, really easy. And so
there's something to be
it's
said
a critical mass that's missing, I think. Sorry, Paul.
There's something to be said for giving people explicit permission to do something. In the Forge era, if you were a designer, you felt like you had permission to do it. But with Itch, the fact that there's a UI and you can just click a button to create your own jam, and and it tells you how to do it, it tells you to create a hashtag, it tells you to promote it, giving people that kind of permission, I'm sure, opens up the creation of game jams wider, than if it's just for people who internally feel like, hey, I have permission to do this. I could do this if I want, because, which, you still get a lot of stuff. I mean, you get the 200-word RPG challenge, you get the Golden Cobra, you get, you do get game challenges if it's only people who feel like they have permission to do it. But when a website gives you a tool to do it and explicitly says, hey, click this button and you can create one, I think that's the effect. The effect that you're seeing is the result of that. Anybody can do it.
Yeah. There isn't necessarily a place to come and talk about it. I mean, the jam forums don't seem to be well used. I've noticed a few jams that I've been on. There's a dedicated forum for every jam, so it's not like there isn't somewhere to go and talk about that specific jam if you want to. But not very many people seem to do it for some reason. Maybe it's a bit forbidding entering into an area where you don't necessarily know the people who you're talking to, in the way that talking about it on Twitter, you're kind of opening up to just your followers.
Yeah, I don't know. And I think that there's there's always kind of a barrier to starting to interact in a way that you're not familiar with interacting with. Like I remember, so I've participated in Game Chef a few times, and the first one I did was a very experimental departure from the way it had been done. So it wasn't done on forums. It was that year. It was you were all supposed to create your own blog and blog about your process through the thing, and there was this aggregation and all this stuff going on, and like most of the people who are familiar with it kind of like were just complaining about it nonstop. And it's like, oh, there should just be a forum. There should just be a forum. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, okay. And, I'm, guilty of the same thing as well. It's like, I hate, trying a new site or interacting in a new way because it's just a lot of work. And like the ones you're invested in, you're kind of going to every day. But the new one, it's like if you're not getting enough out of it, it's kind of hard to work that into your life.
When I launched phase 2 of Threeforged, my fear at that point was that a ton of people were going to fall off the cart. They were going to get their first stage game, and they were going to look at it, and they weren't going to feel inspired about it, and they were going to feel like, oh man, I can't do anything with this. And a ton of games were going to fall off, and it was going to be a disaster. So I recorded a video of myself saying, trying to sort of look people in the eyes and say, you got your stage, you got the stage 1 game to work on. You can change anything and everything about it that you want. It doesn't have to, stage 2 doesn't have to keep anything about the stage 1 game that doesn't engage you, that doesn't inspire you, that doesn't, and stage 2 can be a, mechanical, thematic departure. It can be, it can be a large or small departure from the first stage, because I wanted to give people energy. I wanted to give them permission to be inspired, or find the kernel of an inspiration and take it forward. And I think I think that's somewhat related to what you're saying, Dan, that if you plunge into something and you don't quite know how to do it, or what to do, Threeforged had this sort of it feels to me like it was an easy progression. Your first thing didn't have to be complete. It had a very limited word count. It was like 1,800 words tops, I think. Maybe less. Maybe it was 1,500. I don't even remember.
I think it was like 1,000. I think, or even less. I remember. I remember it had that 200-word RPG didn't exist at that point, but I remember struggling to get everything that I wanted into the word count, so it must have been pretty low.
Yeah, I wanted it to be not intimidating. I want it's like nobody could believe that you could create a fully realized game in this word count, and so that in a way gives you permission to not create a fully realized game, just to sort of float a concept or float an idea forward and see what somebody else does with it. I wanted it to be and then the video at the second stage, I was trying very hard to make it something where the process would feel easy and where it felt like I was giving you the instructions you needed to feel confident to do it. And maybe that's an important element for it's just figuring out how to make it easy and how to make it if you're going to have people who've never done it before, how do you address their doubts and uncertainties and help them feel confident to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in the original Threeforged, just like when I got that first game, I did feel pretty negatively about it. And then I think I saw you watch the video, and then I was kind of like, well, I could abandon it, but you know what? Let me actually try to just let go of my preconceptions and figure out how to make as much of what I got work as possible. And I found that aspect personally very inspiring. And I think in the Threeforged 2019, I had sort of a similar thing of like, the games I got, I sort of wasn't thrilled with the direction they were going, but it's sort of like that was also the interesting aspect of the challenge of like, how can I put part of myself into this, but also, make what's there shine in a way. So it was challenging, but also engaging. And I think someone with Refraction Jam, I had a little bit of a harder time finding that thing, and that might have been the case of you had the option of picking. Right, so it wasn't like there's this thing coming at me that I have to figure out how to make it work and get past my preconceptions, because I had the option to just toss things or I mean, obviously I had the option in the Threeforged, but I sort of personally felt like I should try to stick with the spirit of trying to deliver the idea in the best way I could. So
it's an interesting property of Threeforged as well. I can remember one of the entries that I read, maybe even one of the ones I was involved with, had a round 2 game that took a radically different direction from round 1, and then the round 3 game I think drew on round 1 rather than round 2. It almost just said, "I'll forget about that, I don't like it, I'm going to build on round 1 instead." And the interesting thing about that is that your final game, the one that you really hopefully going to feel you've polished and made as perfect as it can be, you did have that choice. You didn't, you weren't kind of just given this one thing and you had to react to it. You got two sources of inspiration that you could draw on, and I wonder if that helped some people.
Yeah, so that's hard to say. So we've been going for almost an hour here, so I think we've had a pretty good conversation. Do we want to have any final closing thoughts?
I would say if anyone is watching this thinking, these guys are idiots, I could do a much better job of this, please do. I will definitely join in your jam. You know, the moment I hear that a jam is about collaborating with another designer, I am in there. So please run more of these, work out what it is that we are getting wrong, and eventually we will hit on the magic formula that means that everyone in the world of tabletop RPG design works together to create beautiful games.
I do like that sentiment quite a bit. I think, you know, as a creator, I've gotten, you know, pretty good at doing my own thing, and I've floundered at times when I've tried to collaborate with other designers. I did participate in that Jared Sorensen game challenge back in the day, and it was because a friend of mine invited me to do it and asked me. He wanted to be the producer. He asked somebody to be the artist. He asked somebody to be the writer, and he asked me to be the designer. And I said, fine, okay, I'll do it. And then as a producer, I think he failed to keep everybody on board, and so I designed mechanics that he didn't particularly love, and the writer and the artist sort of fell off the cart, and nothing happened. And what I ended up doing was taking my mechanics, turning it into a game, and doing it during the indie phase that Jared allowed, and trying to sell it and trying to win. And I did not, in fact, win. But I think about that a lot. I mean, that was an effort at collaboration that I failed at, and I have since failed, you know, at other efforts to collaborate with other designers. I think it's a super weak skill on my part. So absolutely, if somebody figures out a formula for an exciting collaboration-based game jam, I am definitely interested in seeing it.
Me too, and I'd love to echo it as someone who failed two separate collaboration jam challenges as a round one entry to the Refraction Jam, who never made it to round two, and a eager participant in the partner jam. I forget what it was called. But we paired up
Duet jam.
Yes, yeah. That couldn't quite manage to bring that game across the finish line. It's a skill I'd love to continue to hone in jams, either running or participating, and I'm excited to see what happens next.
All right, well, I think that's a great place to end the conversation. So thanks for everybody for participating.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dan.
For organizing, Dan.